So you want to start playing JRPGs, but there's so much noise to sort through, and you want to make sure you start off on the right foot. It's easy to fall into the trap of jumping into games you hear are incredible, but end up biting off more than you can chew. Or on the other end of the spectrum, try JRPGs made for beginners that just downright suck. So in my ongoing efforts to share my love of the JRPG genre, lower barriers to entry, and banish the gatekeepers, I have been curating a list to help you on your way. Because if there's two things I'm good at, it's coming up with concise titles and coming up with lists. And these are the 10 beginner-friendly Japanese-style turn-based role-playing games interspersed with 5 that you should avoid, because either they suck or they're good but are bad for newcomers. Super Mario RPG, recently re-released for the Nintendo Switch, is perhaps the greatest entry point I could possibly suggest today. The game is a remake of the Super Nintendo classic that has the star power of Super Mario, pun intended, paired with classic turn-based combat. Originally created in collaboration with Squaresoft, the game has a reputation of excellence that precedes itself. The remake picks up the old turn-based combat, brushes off the dust, and gives it a fresh coat of paint, all the while retaining everything that helped the original appeal to so many of us back in the 90s, namely a lighthearted story following the titular Mario and a cast of original characters as they set out to restore the kingdom after a bizarre catastrophe. The combat is turn-based but features real-time button pressing in order to help keep players engaged the entire time. A simple and streamlined leveling system, and a level of disarming charm that cues the players in to relax and enjoy the wacky ride that's ahead of them. And perhaps most importantly of all, the game is just plain fun. The recent port to the Nintendo Switch ensures that the game is readily available as of the time of this video, so it should be more affordable than its retro counterpoint for the foreseeable future. Snag yourself a copy and try jumping into this turn-based classic. This next entry point is honestly such a no-brainer that it almost goes without saying, literally. I suspect most people don't even think about mentioning Pokemon in this discussion because it's that obvious. Pokemon is a long-running franchise that prints money so hard that I really don't even think I need to finish this introduction. It may even be why you're here. So I think it's reasonable to say that the Pokemon franchise is single-handedly responsible for generations of children finding a deep-rooted love for turn-based battle. Even if one of the other central pillars of the JRPG genre, its emphasis on telling compelling stories, is poorly represented. And with so many options available, where should you even start? With accessibility and affordability as one of my guiding posts for making recommendations in this video, I want to lean towards something available on Nintendo Switch because the likelihood of you having a modern console already seems more likely than me talking you into picking up a hobby in retro gaming. So with that said, my general vibe of the most recent releases is that you might want to look into Pokemon Let's Go Eevee or Pikachu. These are remakes, more or less, of Pokemon Yellow from way back on the Game Boy, and the turn-based combat within these games is simplified and streamlined, reducing the emphasis on the grind. The game also incorporates some mechanics from Pokemon Go, so if you got in on that craze, this is a solid foot in the door. Plus, perhaps most enticing of all, is this will get you hands-on with the most famous and iconic Pokemon from the first generation, so you can quickly get up to speed on some of the most beloved Pokemon in the same way that many of us elder millennials did back in grade school, by exploring and getting lost in the magical land of Kanto. So far I've covered 2 excellent starting points for getting into turn-based combat, but I wanted to change gears for a moment and cover a game that often gets brought up in the conversation to help cut off any suggestions that you start with Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. There are a few good reasons this one gets brought up time and time again. One of the most often cited reasons this game exists in the first place is because Americans were too dumb to appreciate the real deal. Reception of Japanese RPGs in the 90s languished in obscurity relative to the reception in Japan. That eventually started to change when Super Mario RPG helped introduce a ton of Mario fans to turn-based combat, but we don't need to go over that again. Before trying a good idea, Squaresoft tried Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, otherwise known as Final Fantasy USA in Japan, to drive home that it was not your typical Final Fantasy. Sure, there were a few quality of life improvements that seemed nice at the time, very few random encounters, aside from tying into a plot point for a single dungeon, streamlined dungeon design, no grinding needed, and it would be a crime for me not to mention the stellar soundtrack. But the game was insultingly simple at times. The protagonist, Ben, is carried by his temporary teammates to the finish line, and scratch what I said about grinding because it actually does exist in the game, it's just been obfuscated. The creators of Mystic Quest were so focused on removing the tedium of an RPG experience that they accidentally forgot to leave in almost anything of value behind. Its meme-like status is novel enough that it might hold the interest of someone who's been around the block a time or two, but I worry that newcomers to the genre are just as likely to swear off the genre after playing the experience as to dig deeper. Besides, there's also not a very accessible way to play this, and I just couldn't recommend spending the mere $15 needed to get a loose Super Nintendo cartridge. Speaking of meme-like status JRPGs, this next recommendation I will endorse comes in the form of Chrono Trigger for PC. If you're new to the genre, Chrono Trigger is the beloved crowned jewel of the retro RPGs and will show up near the top of endless lists counting down the best RPGs ever made. And for good reason. Chrono Trigger has a timeless story of boy meets girl, girl gets thrown across time, and boy has to rescue her and ends up fighting his way through time and space to help prevent the destruction of the planet in the far distant future. You've heard it a million times. In addition to having the uplifting story about people who see a distant cataclysm that threatens their existence itself on the horizon and choosing to actually do something about it, it also has a simple combat system with a unique twist where turns aren't just static. They're based on character speed gauges that determines when they're allowed to attack, uncoupling the flow of battle from the standard everyone waits their turn to attack once per round thing. The game features the iconic artwork of the late and great Akira Toriyama and one of the greatest composers of our time, Yasunori Mitsuda, which ensures that this will leave a lasting impact. Several years ago, when the PC port was first released, it was lampooned by the community at large for being a lazy, sloppy, irredeemable cash grab port of a mobile game, which was well deserved. Since then, though, Square Enix has wiped the egg off their face by transforming this game into what is now, in my opinion, the definitive way to play Chrono Trigger, supporting a 16:9 aspect ratio, improved visual fidelity, a comprehensive retranslation, and the low price tag of just $15, 1/5 or 1/10 of the cost of the current Nintendo DS or SNES releases, respectively. Not too shabby to experience one of the most universally beloved titles of all time. Dragon Quest XI Echoes of an Elusive Age is a more modern title featuring that iconic artwork from, again, the late and great Akira Toriyama that was released on all modern platforms a few years ago. Because of that, you can play it on almost every console that they still sell in GameStop. And the experience is something truly unique. The visuals are pretty dang beautiful, and the music, if you're playing the definitive edition, is beautifully orchestrated and contains several of the series' greatest hits from the last 30 years or so. Dragon Quest XI is in many ways an ode to the 3 decades of Dragon Quest that precedes it, which makes Dragon Quest the longest-running turn-based Japanese RPG franchise, as one of the foundations of the genre back in '86. And what makes Dragon Quest XI so unique is that while seemingly every other video game franchise has dabbled and experimented over the years with combat, aside from maybe Pokemon, Dragon Quest has held steadfast in the wake of change and has remained basically the same. And speaking of Pokemon, if you've ever played it, Dragon Quest is likely to feel the most familiar to you of any other suggestions on this list. The story of Dragon Quest XI feels like a classic fantasy RPG setting. It tells a classic feeling story. It takes itself seriously when the story gets serious and plays to its strengths. It knows what it is and who it's for. And I think there's beauty in that simplicity. Dragon Quest is the quintessential Japanese-style RPG franchise that practically birthed the genre, and Dragon Quest XI is the most easily available way to play a solid entry in that franchise. So pick up a copy and let your own quest begin. But being a well-beloved, quintessential Japanese-style turn-based RPG is not enough to get a solid recommendation on this list. The game I want to talk about now is one that I thoroughly enjoyed my time with. In fact, if you can take on the daunting task of this RPG, you will be experiencing some of the best that the genre has to offer. Octopath Traveler is the original HD 2D RPG from Square Enix. It follows 8 protagonists through each of their individual stories as they explore the land. But Octopath Traveler is, by my estimation, hard as balls. It can be grindy, its exploration is very open-ended, it requires a good deal of strategy, and you will die over and over. The game features a turn-based combat system that has a lot of extra depth for players who can already navigate a turn-based combat system in their sleep. But for somebody who's still figuring out their own personal strategies, still playing turn-based RPGs by reacting to what the enemy has just done, rather than anticipating enemy moves and planning several turns in advance, taking on these extra mechanics might be asking a bit too much. The art is stunning, the music is mind-blowingly good, but it's that complexity of having to learn 8 different character specialties along with juggling several job classes and the risk-reward system of a boost mechanic on top of all of that. I'm sure some people started with Octopath Traveler and lived to tell the tale, but I just can't see that working out for the majority of players who start from zero. Final Fantasy X is an incredible and unique RPG that I cannot recommend enough, especially if you've got a soft spot for love stories. The game follows Tidus in one of the first isekai adventures I remember experiencing as a teen, where Tidus is unceremoniously spirited away by a giant monstrosity attacking during a professional blitzball game he is participating in. He awakens on an unfamiliar beach and is trying to get back to his home, Zanarkand. Final Fantasy X is a simple story and features a simple combat system, especially for a Final Fantasy game. In fact, some might say that it's the last of its kind within the franchise, but it's not the least, featuring the incredibly unique feeling world of Spira and instantly memorable characters. Final Fantasy X has been ported to pretty much every console since its release on the PlayStation 2, making it easily one of the most readily available RPGs to play ever. It has also aged rather well considering the game's age, owing to its groundbreaking visuals of the time and inclusion of voice acting. On the subject of the voice acting, many people have memed this game to near death over one admittedly awkward moment in the game, but the voice acting itself is actually very decent in spite of the sometimes odd direction given to the actors, and in context, that infamous scene is intentionally awkward. The game is wildly underappreciated, which further helps decrease the cost of those releases, making this a prime entry point for anyone watching from the sidelines. Here's one that you'll never see it coming. The Persona series has been steadily gaining traction in the US since its breakout success of Persona 3, which introduced relationship sim mechanics to a much broader audience. The most recent entry in the series, Persona 5, continues to deliver the goods on all major platforms, or depending on tastes, you might prefer Persona 4 Golden. For beginners though, I would definitely take up the easier difficulty modes available, because normal difficulty on these titles is slightly harder than average. Combat is mostly standard as turn-based fare goes, but it features an emphasis on those elemental affinities and weaknesses not entirely unlike the Pokemon games. Picking between Persona 4 and 5 will come down to mainly personal choices, but I suspect Persona 5's superior dungeon variety, noir aesthetic, and avant-garde presentation will help capture the attention and imagination of newcomers, while Persona 4's bright and cheerful yet murder mystery vibe may better click with others. Snag yourself a copy to help unleash the inner RPG fan beneath your mask and reach out to the truth. Here's another classic and wonderful RPG that I've seen people recommend, and I just cannot bring myself to agree, though it breaks my heart. Earthbound is a cult classic Super Nintendo RPG that introduced me to the genre all those years ago. And the first time I played Earthbound, I did not love it. I threw it in the back of my closet and forgot about the game for months. It wasn't until a long summer when I had literally nothing left to play that I decided to give the game a real shot. And eventually, I learned to fall in love with this quirky little game. It worked for me, but this game has aged like a fine cheese, and some of the mechanics have acquired a very noticeable funk over time that might not be palatable to newcomers of the genre. Combat is a simple Dragon Quest style system with small tweaks in addition to a spinning hit point reel and a few quality of life improvements, including the lack of random encounters. It has a very simple combat system overall, but the limited inventory space and unforgiving grind when the new party member joins, sometimes obtuse puzzles, and having to talk to random NPCs to advance the plot, and minimalist presentation during combat could make for a really rocky start. Anyone who knows me knows that I absolutely adore Earthbound, but if you pair that with a general lack of affordable ways to play the game, makes this a no-go, at least for those who are just looking for a way to get into the genre. I wouldn't go so far as to say this game stinks, but newbies might benefit from something a little fresher. This next one is a curveball because I don't think you or many others have really heard of it before. It isn't a universally beloved game, but it is dead simple and kid-friendly. In fact, this is the kind of game I bet you might really enjoy to play side by side with your kid if you have one. The story follows a few kids and their newly acquainted friend Robot saving a world from the end of time. Time has literally stopped flowing on the eve of the new millennium, and all of the electronics have gone haywire and started attacking. Destiny Connect TikTok Travelers features a super unique and stylish world that has just the right amount of eeriness to intrigue young players without inspiring too many nightmares. The combat is a pretty standard turn-based system that will be easy to pick up for kids who have already fallen in love with Pokemon. It's available on PlayStation and Nintendo Switch consoles. The controls are very simple, but will take some getting used to if you're already familiar with navigating around a more typical adventure or action game though. I wouldn't recommend this to most adults to play solo, but if you're looking for an adventure for your kids to co-pilot with you, you could do a lot worse than Destiny Connect. Yakuza Like a Dragon is probably the opposite of Destiny Connect in almost every conceivable way. Not to be confused with the other entries in the Yakuza series, Yakuza Like a Dragon and its sequel are turn-based RPGs that are for, well, my brain wants to say for mature audiences, but my heart is telling me that it's actually for really immature adults. The story of Like a Dragon follows a Yakuza member who took the fall for a murder that he didn't commit. Several years later, after serving his time, he's also trying to get back on his feet. Some people might compare this game to Grand Theft Auto, but I would rather draw comparisons to Earthbound because it's a quirky turn-based RPG set in a modern era where the protagonist uses a baseball bat to fend off real-world foes. It's just disguised to look somewhat a bit more like Grand Theft Auto set in an urban section of Japan. And also the game does get pretty dark and serious from time to time. Very serious, and sometimes a bit naughty too. The game takes itself seriously from time to time, but understands that a good RPG also needs to be able to lighten the mood. It's moments of the game where the light shines its brightest that its shadows can contrast the best. After all, if everything is dark and serious and gloomy all the time, then nothing is. One of the things that I love about Yakuza Like a Dragon is how it handles common turn-based RPG tropes and turns them into real-world scenarios. Special skills might just be swinging a baseball bat really hard, or maybe a teammate's magic ability is just their hellacious halitosis, while summoning a beast to deal massive damage might just be a phone call away. This layer of humor over the top of a combat system might help ease people into some of the more abstract aspects of turn-based combat, acting as a spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down. It also helps that Like a Dragon is currently widely available on modern PlayStation and Xbox platforms, as well as PC, so this is a really great one for people who don't own a Nintendo Switch. Trails from Zero is another series of RPGs that I wish I could recommend to people as a beginner-friendly turn-based RPG, because it again showcases some of the best that the turn-based RPG genre has to offer. incredibly well-built lore and world, an extremely fun and engaging semi-tactical combat system. It's chock full of memorable characters, an engaging story about an underdog rookie cop, incredible music, and when you do fall in love with it, there's something like 10 more games in the series and more coming every couple of years. And they all tie into the same overarching, highly detailed, internally consistent world. But there is really just so much to download for a newcomer. Not only would they be learning turn-based RPG mechanics, but also dealing with the semi-tactical combat system. Magic also isn't just handed to the player, it has to be unlocked via the bespoke orbment system of unlocking spells and abilities by equipping different kinds of crystals. The world is wildly deep and begs to be explored in order to find all of the optional hidden content that could be so easily missed by newcomer players. Even though the series has easy modes that people could experience, I think the difficulty wall of understanding all of the other mechanics could be a real tough barrier to get over for a player starting from zero. This game series fits well within my recommendations for intermediate to advanced players of RPGs, but beginners should give this one a wide berth. Just for now though, trust me, like most RPG loot, you're gonna want to come back for this one once your level is high enough for the challenge. And when you do, it's available on Nintendo Switch, PC, PlayStation 4, but I would probably avoid the PS4 version personally. This is a game I've got to recommend to newcomers despite not having yet finished it myself. Ni no Kuni: Wrath of the White Witch is a turn-based RPG with the star power of arguably the world's most influential anime studio behind the wheel, Studio Ghibli, and created by one of my absolute favorite video game designer studios, Level 5. It's fitting that Ghibli would eventually work on an RPG themselves after having so many of their films inspire and inform so many of my favorite RPGs. Between Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind, Laputa Castle in the Sky, this game makes it feel like it's all coming full circle. In this game, you play as Oliver, a boy journeying through a parallel world to save his mother. This narrative has a blend of childhood innocence and emotional depth that strikes a chord with audiences both young and old. Combat within the game could be a little tricky for newcomers as it integrates real-time elements into the turn-based system, but the game has a variety of difficulty settings which might help newcomers to the genre get settled in. It should also be noted that, as with many other RPGs, the more side quests that you do and the more time you take to enjoy what the game has to offer, the easier the rest of the game will become. The game is relatively kid-friendly, getting a 10+ rating from the ESRB in the US and a PEGI 12 in other regions. The game was originally released for the PlayStation 3 but has been ported and remastered for pretty much everything else since then. And then for something completely different, let's talk about South Park: The Stick of Truth. This game made some waves back when it was originally released for being an actually good South Park game, but over time has faded a bit more from memory. But for some people, this could be an absolutely perfect way to experience a turn-based RPG without all of the pretense that sometimes surrounds the genre. The game follows everybody you already know and love from the show, plus a brand new character. You use the character creator to become a new kid in town and go on an adventure around familiar places and familiar faces for fans of the show, parodying pop culture and the tropes of the very genre that the game has adopted. With its relatively simple combat mechanics, it's an excellent choice for RPG beginners who are also fans of the show's specific brand of satire, and people who might be offended by such notoriously crass humor obviously need not apply. But you can't deny the wide appeal of South Park, and the novelty of a humorous and irreverent look at the genre could be an easy way to fall in love with that genre. Avoid the OG classics. So many of us dyed-in-the-wool JRPG fans got our starts around the time we started enjoying video games 20 or 30 years ago. So a lot of us have a bit of a stagnant mindset when it comes to how to go about introducing newcomers to the genre. We often think, well, it worked for me, so it should work for you, without stopping to think that RPGs have come a long way in that time, and so too has the competition. So you might hear from people that to embark on your JRPG journey, just do what I did and start with Dragon Warrior or Final Fantasy on the NES. But the fact of the matter is, you're already getting exposed to better storytelling from modern Mario titles. Earthbound was a game that introduced me to the love of the genre, but I know better than to expect it to hold the same magic for everyone. Breath of Fire 1 was a foundational JRPG for me growing up, but the encounter rate is a crime against my childhood. Even older classics like Breath of Fire 3 that are widely acknowledged for its grandeur and masterful execution has a few key points that could easily cause a newcomer to falter, get frustrated, and give up, as I once did 20 years ago when I first played it. For a certain kind of person, it's going to be tempting to get to know a genre by getting to know its roots, but in doing so, you'll be forfeiting decades now of quality of life improvements that will make your first steps into this adventure all the more welcoming. But beginners don't have to start with turn-based RPGs. Action RPGs as a whole are a phenomenal way to start dipping your toes into incredible stories, and even the classics hold up to this day. This video right here is a list of the top-tier action RPGs that can also make for an incredible entry point for beginners. Check it out.